I would say that we haven't seen this level of protest, going back throughout the history of the Islamic Republic. I don't want to go and say that they are, they're similar to what happened in 1979 with the Shah, because a lot of people are saying that, and I don't have evidence to suggest that we're at that scale just yet. And I don't mean to minimize the protests either. I'm just saying that if you start from the student protests in 1999, which were sort of the first wave of popular unrest against the regime, and then you go to 2009, you go to 2019, 2022, 23 with the Masa Amini killing and the Zan Zindagi Azadi movement. This is far bigger than that. And there are reasons for that. First is the geographic spread. But most importantly, this is probably the very, very first time that the merchant class has come out in protest against the regime because of the devaluation of the currency and the hit that their businesses have taken. And then obviously, others join in because others have different gripes. But there is a strong undercurrent sentiment within the country that is against the regime and, is ready to sort of join agitation as and when it erupts. I think it's all of the above. I think people are just exhausted with this regime, and for a variety of reasons, social restrictions, political opposition, economic deprivation. I mean, you can go down the list. But I think what is noteworthy here is that invincibility factor of the regime, or the resilience factor of the regime, is no longer there. I mean, people have seen over the decades that this regime has put down unrest and successfully calmed the streets. Life went back to business as usual. But what is different this time is that it comes after the devastating defeat of Iran in the region with the destruction of its proxies, and then the June 12-day war with Israel that basically laid bare the if you will reality of the regime. And so people are far more angry. People are far more confident. One of the things to bear in mind is that the regime has been criticized also for the fact that, and it comes from within as well. So these are now no longer the usual opposition elements. These are far more people who are otherwise sort of fence sitters, or people who just don't want to get into trouble, people who have livelihoods to worry about rather than go out and protest. Those people have been drawn in as well because the regime's strategy has completely floundered. People are asking the question, okay, so the IRGC spent hundreds of millions of dollars, several billions, actually tens of billions over the years to support proxies in Lebanon, in the Palestinian territories, in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. And whatever happened to that, that was sold to the nation as, this is the defense strategy of the country. And so when they saw all of those sort of the quote unquote axis of resistance collapse one after the other like dominoes, then there's a, you know, people are going to say, so, we suffered economically at home under sanctions and whatnot, yet you kept pumping money into these projects. And what do we have? And then to, top it all off, you have the situation where Iran was defenseless against Israeli airstrikes. There was just no, air defense mechanism that worked. The Israeli Air Force would be able to strike back in June with literally impunity. And so people are saying, so, you're so security heavy, this entire securitized state with the IRGC at its center, what was that all for? So there's a lot of anger and frustration that sort of now coming together. So I can't say, I don't want to go into sort of binaries where we say, oh no, this is just going to all fizzle out, or oh no, the regime this time is going to collapse. So I think reality is somewhere in the middle. I think that maybe they can sort of calm the streets down momentarily, but this isn't going away. The problem isn't going away. Uh, the regime is much, much weaker. And so the big question here is not what the IRGC will do, but what would the regular armed forces, the Artesh, will do. The IRGC has been severely weakened with, as many as 20 of its top commanders having been killed in the war with Israel. And that's left the IRGC weakened. And therefore, there's an incoherence. Plus, the establishment has brought to the fore pragmatic elements in the form of the Pezeshkian government that took office in July of last year, or actually the year before, in July of 24. And so you have a disagreement amongst the elites of the Islamic Republic as to how to deal with this. So that means that the IRGC is not going to be able to crack down the way it has, and therefore, and the center of gravity in the system is shifting pretty rapidly to where the regular armed forces are now a major stakeholder. And they don't have the same ideological affinity with the Republic. They're more nationalists, Iranian nationalists. And they're a secular professional force as opposed to an ideological, oversized militia, which is the IRGC. And therefore, we need to see, how this plays out because I don't think the regime is on the same page as to what needs to be done. I mean, it's like it's almost paralysis while it's in systemic decay. That's a piece I wrote like 2 days ago. So I don't think that either the United States or Israel is under any illusion that they can affect regime change in Iran. This is just not possible. It's too messy, too big of a country. That's just not doable. But what does seem more likely is, you press in certain on pressure points and you do certain tactical moves, such as the president of the United States basically saying, "Look, if you shoot, then we're going to shoot too." I think that's what he said yesterday. Israel has a different calculus. Israel is in the region. Israel is also, we see sort of this divergence in the American-Israeli position. Israel is very much supporting the son of the former Shah of Iran, Mr. Reza Pahlavi, who has gained some following in this sort of melee that's happening inside the country, where we're seeing evidence of that. I don't think it's enough to sort of, say that he commands a large following, but it's not trivial, is what I'm saying. Israel is supporting that, but notice the president of the United States refused to meet with Mr. Pahlavi just yet. It's not like he doesn't want to meet him. It's to me, it's a signal that the United States is still in communication with the regime. And that's how I would read the foreign minister of Iran's statement as well, is that it's not what they're saying publicly, it's what they're not saying publicly. And so I think there is a communication going on there. I think the Trump administration doesn't really know what to do just yet because the situation is so fluid. You don't want to side with Pahlavi. You don't want to just sort of go. I mean, what is the United States going to do? First of all, there is no appetite for a major military operation. I mean, if you want to sort of go back and see like a benchmark or a reference point, Venezuela is the case. So the United States didn't take out the regime. The United States just removed one individual because it was doable. In the case of Iran, I don't see it as doable. I think that the United States is hoping that this sort of coalition, loose coalition of pragmatic, factions that are aligned with the regular armed forces, uh, are able to sort of reach a point where they are able to change course and then calm the streets down. Now that's a slippery slope, and and President Trump knows that. But like I said, when you don't have good options, you're sort of looking for what is doable. I think they're largely insulated. There's the Persian Arabian Gulf between them. So the spillover is something Pakistan should be worried about. The spillover is what Azerbaijan is concerned about. The spillover is what Iraq is concerned about, and Turkey, and to a lesser extent Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, because those are the land borders of the country. So I think that the UAE is doesn't have a whole lot of leverage in this. I think the Saudis are sort of working with Pakistan and Turkey to try to manage the region because obviously this is a strategic problem that they have to deal with. And I think they're closely monitoring the situation. And there is no entry point for these actors. I mean, if it's difficult for the United States to find that entry point in which to go in and sort of sort things out, then these are much smaller players. I mean, they're pretty serious. So let's just sort of do a hypothetical here. Let's say that Tehran spins out of control. In other words, it cannot impose its writ. And I'm not saying we're there yet. We're far from it. But let's say Tehran cannot impose its writ in Sistan và Balochistan province, which is the one that borders Pakistan. And we know that that province has a history of rebel groups, armed rebel groups, creating significant problems for the regime. We know this is an area in which ISIS, plays as well. We know that Iran has, its own Baloch insurgents or Baloch rebels, and they happen to be of Islamist Deobandi flavoring. And we know that there's a Taliban regime not too far away. And on the Pakistani side of the border, you have a Baloch insurgency. So this is a recipe for, things to go bad very quickly. So I think that we need to be watching this space. It's not as acute because of the nature of the, northwestern provinces with the Azeri ethnic community, which is the largest in the country, about 25%. But it's interesting that the situation is much more acute in Sistan và Balochistan because they're ethnically Baloch, not Persian. Religiously, they're not Shia, they're Sunni. And, so there is that geosectarianism. There is the Islamist factor in there, the Islamist military, competing Islamist sort of vision. And of course, organized crime, all sorts of other things that, can be disrupted and whatnot. And so, yeah, let's say things go south and there is nobody there, then, if fighting begins between government forces and it reaches levels like we've seen in Syria, I'm not saying it's happening, but let's say it does, then yeah, people, you can see refugees flowing over. Well, where are they going to go? Yeah, I don't think that the administration is that unpredictable in Washington, but yeah, I get the point. Um, Look, I think we've already seen a really dramatic sort of turn of events as far as Pakistan-US relations are concerned. Relations have improved dramatically. Pakistan is being seen by this administration as a security partner in West Asia. That means Middle East, that means Pakistan's western flank, then, Central Asia add in. And now that was already happening. So I see the United States and Pakistan sort of tag teaming along with, of course, the Saudis are going to be involved in it, and there's probably going to be a Turkish element as well. But Turkey has to worry about its border with Iran. But yeah, I see Pakistan and the United States working this out. As far as, domestically, it's going to be, it needs to be it needs to be managed by the government of Pakistan or the leadership in that they don't sort of, this doesn't look like a geosectarian conflict. And it becomes more of, hey, this is national security. We have this big state that is, spinning out of control. And so we need to protect ourselves and we need to manage this crisis. So I think this is more about that. But yeah, I mean, things can go south pretty fast if it's not dealt with in a sophisticated manner. So great question. I think the two that matter the most are Iraq and Yemen. Lebanon, as you can see, Hezbollah is not what it used to be. It's already, sufficiently degraded. The Assad regime is gone, and Syrian and Iranian influence in Syria is gone. I mean, Turkey has replaced Iran as the external power in that country. The Palestinian territories are for everybody to see. There's just, the likes of Hamas and PIJ are devastated with the war with Israel. But yes, Iraq could suddenly, become there could be instability because there are all sorts of Shia factions, political factions in Iraq that have varying levels of ties to Iran. So Iran has a number of different proxies that it has cultivated over the decades, at least since the fall of the Saddam government, and they don't get along well either. And then there is so if Iran weakens and sort of the Shia South and the central government dominated by the Shia of Iraq, becomes unstable, then it has implications for relationships with the Kurds in the north, who have a regional government of their own, which have autonomy there. Then, there's the Shia Sunni thing. I mean, this is an opportunity for the Sunnis to try and claw back some of the influence that they have lost, especially now that in Syria they have a Turkish-backed Sunni government. So this can get really messy really fast in Iraq. The Houthis are already facing sort of like how many opposition forces are they dealing with? There are the Southern secessionists backed by UAE, and then there is the internationally recognized government that's backed by Saudi, and then there are the Houthis who control the core of Yemen from the south, the south western border with Saudi Arabia, all along the Red Sea, down to the Bab al-Mandab. This is sort of the core that is in the control of the Houthis, including the capital, Sana'a. And so they're already struggling with that. Now, if they lose support if Iran no longer is able to support them, then the balance of power in Yemen can shift as well. It's already crazy because we have the Saudis and the UAE sparring over Yemen. And so the region is sufficiently, unanchored already. And Iran is a big country. I mean, we haven't talked about what this means for Azerbaijan, which is a huge, place because that's where the ethnic Azeris make up a quarter of all Iranian nationals. The president is Azeri ethnically. The supreme leader is Azeri ethnically. The head of the regular armed forces is Azeri. And so, this is a very influential community. So we're looking at, tremors that will be felt far beyond Iran if things go south. I think the Israelis depend on the US for the broader strategic sort of guidance. But yes, they also do their own intelligence operations. Bear in mind, the Mossad is very sophisticated and has a lot of penetration of Iran, but that's intelligence penetration. Militarily, Israel is limited in what it can do. It can do airstrikes, but it will not do it without the Americans telling them to. And in this case, given this sort of, chaos that is metastasizing, I just don't see the Trump White House giving, Israel the green light to do that. I think anything that needs to be done is going to be done by the United States. The question is what? Do we pluck, Khamenei out like we did with Maduro? I just don't see that happening. It's a completely different scenario. The interest of the United States here, and mind you, the whole purpose of taking Maduro out of the equation was that the regime was ready to do business with the United States. And so if you the situation in Iran is far more complicated and chaotic. And so if you do something like similar to that in Iran, it could backfire easily. And so you want to sort of calibrate an intervention. At best, I'm looking at airstrikes on IRGC facilities that are sort of used by the guards to do crowd control. But that's where I am right now. The reason I'm saying this is the president has been very cautious. He's been asked by some of his aides and associates to find time to meet with Raza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah. He's declined that, and that's very significant. It's not that he's rejecting him. It's just he's saying it's not the right time just yet, because he knows Raza Pahlavi has limited, very limited influence in the country, and he needs to deal with the regime, which is still very much in control. Because the last thing you want is a complete collapse and chaos. And so I think what the United States will do is try to caliber, but that too, if its hand is forced. It's not something that this administration is going to just go in a very casual manner. Great question. And so there are pathways. I don't think I should call them options. There are pathways that the regime can go down. And I think we need to start to not talk about the regime as a singularity, as a singular entity, coherent, monolithic. It's far from it. It has never been that way. But now, in this current moment, when there's so much stress and strain on the system, you can see the different centers of power gravitating into different directions, and hence the paralysis and the lack of consensus on what needs to be done. So I think that uh, for now, every stakeholder, this is what I wrote about 2 days ago in my piece, or every faction knows there has to be some change, that things cannot go on as they have been. And that is sort of the first order of business in order to quell this agitation. You know, they're under no illusion that they can, they're trying, but they're under no illusion that they can just sort of stamp this out as they did. They will definitely try, but you try with, a certain amount of certainty, and I don't think they have much confidence in that. Not given the way things have been shaping up recently. So that's one. But then the question is, what change? You know, do you, they were already trying to front load a succession to Khamenei in order to prevent protests from taking place in the event that he dies. So they wanted to preempt that. But events overtook that whole thing. These protests offset those plans. So now if you uh, effect a succession, then that looks like you're weak, and that emboldens the crowds even further. That doesn't send out a message, and then not everybody in the regime is will agree to that, and so there is that problem. Um, I just don't see, there has to be something symbolic that they need to do in order to tell the protesters to calm down. I'm not saying they're just yet there. They may get there, but that's what happens. I go back to what happened in Egypt in January of 2011, when the military came in and basically said, we're not going to fire on the protesters. What we're going to do is tell Mubarak to leave. Did the regime, collapse? No. There are a lot of people who thought the regime collapsed. They just sort of threw the president out in order to preserve the regime. Can something happen like that here? It's much more messier because of sort of the religiosity factor and sort of the ideological factor. And the armed forces of Egypt, like Pakistan, are much more cohesive. We have two separate militaries in Iran, the regular armed forces that are not ideological and the IRGC. And then there is as many as 1 million militiamen under the label of Basij that the IRGC control. So this could break out into civil war if they don't do this carefully. So they're constrained by what policy options they can do. But what their goal is to calm the streets down to a point where they have certain relative stability and then effect these changes. Because if they do them now, it's a sequencing thing. And so, but the question is, that's what they want. can they actually pull that off? Because objective realities are different, than what your strategic plans can be. And so I think that's what I'm going to be watching for. Let's say in a worst case scenario that this thing is not being controlled. I can expect a coup by the military where they declare a state of emergency and they take over power. The supreme leader is part of that process. He willingly sort of steps back and he fades into history. And this new reality emerges. There's a new leadership under the president who is far more empowered. I think that's the pathway that seems more likely because we have to make a distinction between the regime and the state. The regime has to undergo change. Can it? I don't know. To what extent? We don't know. But let's say the regime is not salvageable. The regular armed forces will not allow state institutions to collapse. That's just not going to happen. And therefore, they will then jump in, of course, with allies from the guards and others. There has to be some consensus. But you see the complexity of what I'm talking about and how difficult all of this is.